The third video for week 3. This one is talking about the source evaluation. So let's get right into it and take a look at this notes to show you what's going on. These notes, of course, over on the right side are by me. You can ignore the one, I'll take these off probably, but you can ignore where somebody's made their own comments on here. As you can see here, this shows you exactly how it should look. So this is why this is so important to use the source evaluation, to use the samples, because they show you exactly how it should look. You have your name, my name, class information, and the due date. Remember, this is the due date. That way you just set it once and forget it. You don't have to change that date every time you work on it or something. It's just the date that the paper's due, right? And that due date is next Sunday for the source evaluation. I'm not sure off the top of my head what day that is, but anyway, not this coming Sunday, but next Sunday. So also don't forget that your name and your last name and page numbering goes up in here. And remember, the way to do that is just go up here in the header, double click it, and it'll change like this, and you just type it in there. You got to use the way to do page numbering, which is here, right here under formatting. You go down here where it says page numbers, and then it will ask you if you want to put it in the header or footer. You should put it needs to be in the header. Show on first page, you can do that, or if you're going APA, you normally don't show it on the first page, because the first page is actually something called a title page. And so on this one, you would turn this off, and you would start it on page 1, which would be the second page, technically speaking, if you're doing APA. Okay, but you put it in there, make sure it's right margin, make sure you have your last name and a space and the number. And then when you're done with it, putting it up there, you double click. Now you have to use that function up here, this page numbering function, or every page will just be the same number. It'll say page 1, page 1, page 1, right? Notice it automatically numbers when you do it the right way. So, title should look like this. All of your titles should have whatever the project is, or whatever the thing is you're working on, exercise number, whatever, here. In this case, since it is an exercise, but it's more important than an exercise, I'm fine with you just making it source evaluation rather than exercise 2. Okay? So that, remember, that's something that you want to have there to begin with. Then you have a colon, and then you have your creative subtitle that's based on your topic. Okay? And then your introduction here, you notice she starts with her hook. Capital punishment, also known as the death penalty, dates back to the 18th century, but laws, use, and justifications around this type of punishment continue to change to this day. And then she talks about what it's like today. And then she introduces the source. Notice that she introduces the source as a book, online book source, with the proper italics. Remember I said that if it's a book, since that's the whole, and instead of a chapter from a book, you put it in italics. If it were a chapter from a book, it would be in quotation marks. But since it's the whole, it's in italics. And then you put the author, written by Andrea D. Lyon, and you want to state something about that author to let your audience know they are worth listening to. So that's what you do here. She's qualified by saying she's a renowned lawyer, author, professor, and dean. Previously was a dean of a college. Right, and then she dives into this idea of how the death penalty is seen across the U.S. And then that's period. Then she says, based on my evaluation of the source, comma. She should have had a comma there, but no big deal. I don't quibble on little things, all that much. But if there's a lot of them, then I start worrying about them. But if you're missing a comma here, a couple of one or two places, that's not going to hurt you. But if you're missing commas every other sentence, every practically throughout the whole paper, I'm going to definitely point it out and tell you to be concerned about it, tell you to fix it. All right. She says, I think it will be beneficial to use my report. So there's her introduction, short and sweet, nicely done. Now, notice uses the introductory words such as this. This is what I really prefer, because it helps me to see that your criteria are there separately. So you could say my criteria are going to be blank, blank, and blank in your first sentence if you wanted to, but you can also just do it this way. notice how she does it. One of the criteria that is considered when evaluating a source is accuracy. Then she talks about that. And then she says here, she talks a little bit about that and why it's important. And then she says another criteria is that is important to consider is authority. And she talks about that. And then she says potential weakness. So she only had 2. Remember, you have to have at least 2, preferably 3. But she only had 2, and it was okay. And then she says a potential weakness. Again, put that word in bold. That way I can tell easily that you have. I wouldn't even mind if you put these criteria in bold. It makes it stand out to me. It makes it easy for me to find them and know that you've done them, right? So potential weakness of this source is the large inclusion of personal experiences, blah, blah, blah. So she considers what she thinks is a weakness. And then she talks about, remember in the source evaluation guidelines, it tells you to talk about what a good source could do for you. And then she does that. And then she talks specifically about how it's going to help her own credibility and ethos. And she uses the word ethos, which is awesome. The more of these words you can use that we talk about and that you're learning about, the better. Right? Remember, ethos is part of what we call rhetorical strategies. That's ethos, logos, and pathos. And you'll probably remember the ethos is about credibility, logos is about logic, and pathos is about appealing to people's emotions. Pathos is the one you got to be careful with. You cannot use it too much, or it'll make your paper seem much less credible, because you're not using lots of strong logic. And if you overdo it with pathos or emotion, it comes off as though you're just writing it from all emotion, and that harms your credibility. So remember that pathos should be very minimal. Most of it should be logos or logic. You're appealing to their sense of logic and what makes sense. And then all of that goes together to help establish your ethos. All right? Then here's her paragraph where she talks, basically the conclusion here. Through the conclusion of factual information and use of established credibility, this source was able to meet my accuracy and authority criteria. Meeting these criteria is important, blah, blah, blah. She tells you why it's important, and she ends by stating something, like I said in the guidelines, and by telling your audience why you have chosen it or not chosen it. She, of course, chose it. So she says, after thoroughly evaluating the Lion's death penalty, what's keeping it alive, I've chosen to use it in my own report. And then, of course, she has to have a works cited page with that single entry on it. Now, like I said, you can do APA. I'm not going to have a lot of information about how to do APA, because if you're using it, I'm assuming it's probably because you know how to, or hopefully that's why you would be using it. Maybe you're already using it for some of your other classes, and maybe you're already familiar with it. But it's basically boiled down to whatever you're more comfortable with or would prefer to use. But I use Works Cited because that's the one that maybe some students haven't had experience with and would need to know more about. So, and that's how English works. Usually when you're writing about literature and stuff like that, it uses MLA. So that's kind of the English standard, right? So that's it. That's all you have to do for this one. Notice hers is almost 2 pages long, but that's not terribly long, and she has everything in there she's supposed to have. So she does a good job of getting it all fit in there. So just make sure you look through this, use my comments over here to remind yourself what it's showing you and what it's doing. And if you have questions, just let me know.